Are you comfortable enough to let the sky take a little weight for you tonight? A pale green trace hangs in the dark like a hush you can see, and I'm here with you, voice low, the room dim, the world unbusy. We'll keep our eyes soft together. Before we wander farther, a small invitation. Set your phone to Do Not Disturb, loosen your shoulders, and if you like, wear headphones so the edges fade. You can follow the Sleepy Scientist playlist to find your way back on other nights. Nothing urgent here, only a long, even tide of calm. Our companion this evening is a visitor between stars, slipping through our solar neighborhood with a faint green breath around it. I'll guide you gently. What makes a glow? How instruments listen in the dark? Why some paths through space are one-way passages, and how quiet facts can feel like constellations when they're placed with care. No hype, no chase, just the steady light of what we can see, the careful warmth of what we can reasonably infer, and the rest's left to drift by without argument as you sink into softer air. And if you doze, and I hope you do, the story will keep its own pace, returning to wide truths and simple images so you can rejoin at any moment without needing to catch up. I'll keep a steady rhythm, unhurried and kind, so your breathing can find something to mirror while the night does its quiet work. We begin here. Let your gaze move the slow way tonight. Across the dark field, there is a soft halo, pale and even, and I guide your eyes from the dim edge inward until the green rests near center. The stars hold steady. The visitor does not. A thin veil around a small core, not much to look at by day, becomes a patient light at night, and that quiet halo is our handrail for the first minutes here. I trace an arc with you, left to right, then back, so the faint motion declares itself. That is how wide-field surveys learn the sky, by teaching cameras to notice movement the way our eyes do when we blink 2 frames. Night after night, instruments sweep, compare, and flag the wanderers that refuse to stay put. Systems with open eyes catch them, and people with calm attention confirm them, a partnership of steady optics and steady patience. The halo is modest, but the motion is sure. What then makes this a visitor between stars, rather than a neighbor born here? The path tells it gently. Most bodies near us move in ovals, bound to the sun's pull, but some drift in on a curve that never closes. If the shape is open and the speed high enough, the line does not return. It only passes through. The mathematics can be neat and crisp, yet the picture you need is simple. A one-way path drawn in light across a black page. The halo comes, the halo goes. That greenwash around the core has a story too. Sunlight strikes small carbon molecules, and they glow for a short time, then quiet again. Gas near the nucleus makes a loose atmosphere we call a coma. Dust follows a different rule, pushed by light and by charged wind until a faint tail unfurls. Green is not a verdict, but a clue, a sign that certain bands of light are being set ringing by the star we share. The color comforts more than it claims. We have seen different kinds of visitors before, and this calm one sits between them without needing to copy either. One earlier traveler looked almost bare, more rock than vapor, offering little gas to catch the light. Another behaved like a classic comet, rich with ice and dust, its activity easy to read. Each carried its own chemistry and its own manner of brightening, and this one, with its modest halo and measured changes, reminds us that space writes more than one script in the same alphabet of light. The the quiet halo stays our leitmotif. I keep your eyes on brightness because brightness is how first truths arrive. A dot becomes a smear becomes a soft fan, and with patient watching, the fan breathes in and out with distance from the sun. Instruments count photons, but we practice a gentler count. How the edge sharpens or loosens, how the hue leans warmer or cooler, how the background stars seem to drift past. And in that simple habit of looking, without hurry, without judgment, we collect the kind of evidence that lets the mind soften its grip and the body follow into rest, as if the room itself had turned the dimmer to a kinder setting. You do not need a telescope to share this. You only need to imagine a page of dark silk and a drop of diluted light spreading slowly at its center. The page does not move. The drop glides. We watch the glide, and by watching, we understand enough. Interstellar means unbound by our sun, passing through our neighborhood with courtesy and leaving almost no trace beyond the memory of how the color sat in the night. The less we push, the more the picture offers. We end this first look where we began, with the green around a small, steady core. I sweep the field one more time, guiding your eyes along the dim rim and back to center so the motion writes itself again, a line made only by patience and light. The halo is still there, quieter now, as if the color had thinned. It eases toward a cooler shade and fades, like a mint glow dissolving into early blue, and we let it go. The detector is patient. It lifts the faintest counts like a bedside clock that prefers whisper to gong, and I lean into that rhythm until the room and the instrument share one heartbeat. A pixel wells, a register steps, a tiny click becomes a mile of calm. I keep my voice low enough to sit beneath the hum. Photometry first, then spectroscopy. Two ways of listening to the same visitor. When we measure brightness, we are hearing volume, the overall loudness of the glow. When we split that glow, we find tones, the precise notes that certain molecules sing when sunlight wakes them. A camera sums the whole chorus. A spectrograph places each voice on its own line so we can follow the melody without hurry. Everything takes its time, and that suits us. The infrared carries the softest parts of the song. Cold volatiles answer there. Too quiet for the visible. Clear enough when you tune to longer wavelengths. I set the bandpasses and let the instruments do what they were built to do. A near-infrared arm gives me crisp lines where carbon compounds respond. A mid-infrared ear warms to broader features that many ices share. Nothing is declared. It is only heard, then measured, then heard again to be sure. We keep the heartbeat steady. Between frames, motion shows itself the way an offbeat does in music. I blink 2 images, and a point nudges forward, small but consistent. Survey pipelines keep the tempo. Expose, read, compare, flag, and I step in for the human part of the duet, checking that the pattern belongs to the sky and not to the camera or the air. A quiet cadence develops. Open shutter, count, close, open, count, close. Under that pulse, the visitor repeats its gentle shift against the stars. Signal and noise are just 2 instruments sharing a stage. Noise is the room's soft murmur, thermal hiss, readout rustle. Signal is the line that returns to the same place every bar. If the bar is too short, we extend it with longer exposure. If the line is buried, we stack bars together until the melody rises a little higher than the hum. The number we quote has a name, but the feeling is simpler. When the whisper stops sounding like a whisper and starts sounding like a voice. That's when we trust it. In the spread out light, certain notes stand where they always have. Carbon molecules answer near familiar positions. Other species add harmonies we recognize from many comets. Each line is a narrow bell, and the spacing between bells writes a signature that, once read, never quite leaves the ear. I place markers with care, resisting haste. A tiny shift, a slightly stronger note, a line that grows as the object warms. Each is a small change in volume, not a verdict, and I keep the instrument heartbeat as our guide. There are nights when the chart changes faster, not by drama, but by gentle syncopation. A vent turns into the light and the line brightens. The body spins and it softens again. The rotation moves the source through warm and cool like a hand finding and leaving a string. So we accept that a curve will ripple, and we lengthen our listening window, and we let the cadence of measurement settle into a longer measure that forgives the quick accents and keeps faith with the underlying tempo that everything in the sky eventually returns to, however many small variations run along its surface. A minute now, just to sit with the instruments as they breathe. The fan is a low drone. The refrigerator whispers with a fine, even thread. The server clicks as files land one by one in their quiet shelves. If your shoulders want to drop, let them. The room knows how to hold them. The data will wait for us in the same rhythm we left it. When I return to the display, the counts are where they ought to be. The lines are not loud, but they are steady. I annotate one, then the next, and save the night set with the same care a musician gives to packing a favorite instrument at the end of a slow, good session. The spectrograph ticks once. Why does the coma look green? The short answer is that small carbon pairs, called C₂, are stirred by sunlight, and, for a brief stretch on their path away from the nucleus, they release that energy in the part of the spectrum our eyes read as green. The longer answer is calmer still. Gas lifted from the surface breaks apart under ultraviolet light, leaving fragments that glow for a moment as they travel outward, then fade as new fragments take their turn. A soft green trace becomes a waypoint on the visitor's route through our neighborhood, a signpost rather than a destination. What makes a molecule glow at all? Imagine a step taken, then another, each step storing a little push, and then giving it back. Solar photons give the push. The molecule gives it back as light with a characteristic color, and the color tells us which steps were taken. C₂ has well-known steps, the swan bands that land in the green. So when these fragments are common in the gas, green becomes the most noticeable mile marker along the way. Nothing mystical about it, only a method the universe uses to keep track of where energy has walked. Another traveler on this route is the CN molecule. Its favored band glows in a bluish violet, and instruments can follow that hue, even when our eyes are not so sensitive to it. In quiet terms, different molecules keep to different lanes on the same road, and the mix of lanes we notice depends on how the sun is illuminating the stream that day, how fast fragments are produced, and how clear our own view is. The soft green trace is simply the most visible lane when C₂ is freshly made. Distance from the sun gently reshapes the journey. Far out, little happens. Closer in, more sunlight lands per square distance, and the pace of chemical steps quickens. That does not promise a dramatic show. only a gradual rise in activity that may strengthen or soften certain colours as the object rounds its closest approach and heads back out again. On the inward leg, green may grow town by town. On the outward leg, it may fall away with the same patience. The road bends, and the mile markers grow farther apart. Gas and dust do not keep the same schedule. Gas spreads quickly and takes its cues from the chemistry just beneath the surface. Dust responds to sunlight's pressure more than to chemistry, so its path arcs away like a fork in the road, broad and steady. If you looked long enough, you would see that the gas trail and the dust trail separate like travellers with different destinations, one narrow and responsive to the day's light, the other wide and slow to change. That fork is part of why comets wear two trails, each telling a slightly different version of the same trip. Sometimes geometry plays a quiet trick. From certain vantage points, a trail of dust can appear to point sunward, a feature observers call an anti-tail. Nothing about the physics reverses. It is our line of sight that shifts, like meeting a friend at a bend in the path and finding their shadow stretched oddly across the paving. The object continues on its route. The dust follows its own rules, and our perspective makes a temporary shape that returns to normal when we move a little farther along. How do we tell green from green when many cameras assign colour in their own measured way? We use filters that define a lane, narrow bands that isolate the expected steps of C2 and the neighbouring bands of CN, and then compare nights as the visitor advances along its orbit. If a filter tuned to the swan bands brightens relative to a red continuum filter, we infer that freshly made fragments are abundant near the nucleus that night. If the ratio softens, we take it to mean the balance has shifted, perhaps toward dust or toward different gases. We do not assume one rule holds every mile. We check again. You may wonder whether green implies a particular parent ice. The careful reply is that C2 often arises when more complex carbon-bearing molecules, born from ices such as CO2 or CO and from organic-rich material, break apart under sunlight, so the green is a breadcrumb on the road, not the bread itself. Water, too, can join the story indirectly by feeding other fragments that add to the glow, and the balance among these sources can change with time of day on the nucleus, depth of the warmed layer, and how loosely the surface is bound. The route is the same, the traffic varies. As we keep pace with the object across the star field, its soft green trace may thicken, then thin. Not because anything sudden has happened, but because the traveller has moved from one stretch of road to another. The sun at a slightly different angle, a vent turning into light, a patch turning away again. Observers collect these changes night after night, then lay them out like a map. And the map does not insist on a single meaning. It shows a pattern of mile markers that align with what we know from many comets, that colour strengthens near warmth and eases with cold, that gas and dust part company at a junction, and that perspective matters when we read a path that is three-dimensional while we stand at one corner of it, as patient as we can be, while the visitor continues on, step after step, without any need for us to hurry it along. I keep one more thought for you as your breathing slows. A colour is not a claim. It is an address along the route where we can look again, listen again, and compare the pace of this traveller with the pace of others who have passed. The green is a guidepost you can trust to appear and fade with ordinary reasons. And the reasons are kind to sleep because they move at the same deliberate speed our minds prefer when the day is done. If the trace stays soft as the object rounds its turn and heads outward once more, where do you think the next mile marker will greet us? Postcard dated October 29th, late. The air dry and settled. A hush at the edge of town, short grass silvered by starlight, and far above, the visitor rides low like a slow tide rounding a headland. I note the time in the margin, give the sky a minute to steady, and let the field of stars become the quiet harbour where our eyes come to rest. Closest approach to the sun is a simple idea, with a deep, even pull. Perihelion, the near point of an orbit, is where sunlight falls a little stronger and warmth creeps farther into a surface that has been cold for a very long voyage. Nothing sudden is promised. The tide just rises, and with it the ease with which ices can lift as gas, making the faint atmosphere we call a comae and the trailing streams we call tails. The visitor stays on course. Only its wake grows softer and broader in our sight. A notebook lies open on my knee. I sketch the sky like a coastline, not to capture the look so much as the drift. The comae sits like a pale lagoon around a darker inlet. The tail, or what tonight amounts to one, extends as a gentle current away from the sun's direction. Colour leans toward sea-glass green near the core, and thins toward blue-grey downstream, as if the water itself were changing with depth. Seeing is slow shipping. It takes patience to cross a page of night. Heat works as a tide under crust. Sunlight is the driver, but the surface answers on its own schedule. Pores open to the day. Fine vents find the light, and jets unfurl like brief streamers riding a current that shifts with the body's rotation. When the nucleus turns, one inlet faces the sun and brightens. When it turns away, it quiets. Fickle only in the way a shoreline is fickle. Never the same wave twice, always the same sea. Then a small geometry trick sets in, the kind that has sent more than one observer back to their charts with a soft smile. Dust, heavier than gas, follows the broad current of orbital motion and sunlight's pressure, and from certain angles that stream appears to point sunward rather than away. We call this an anti-tail, and it is no violation of rules, only the art of perspective, like seeing a boat's wake run oddly toward the bow when you watch from the pier at a bend in the channel. Move along the quay, and the pattern returns to the expected line. Older cases help us read tonight with calm. Other comets near their warmest pass have shown the same bound to the sun rhythm, a slow brightening, local jets that rise and fall, dust that grows more abundant, and then thins as the ship of ice and rock sails back into colder water. Spacecraft once kept pace with a comet at its perihelion, and watched the jets feather outward like spray in a steady wind. Telescopes from the ground traced the growing coma and the lengthening tail, then the soft decline as the object left the inner sea behind. Nothing in our view is out of character for a traveller passing a warm shore. I turn down the gain a notch and breathe with the night. The current of green near the nucleus is thicker than a week ago, thinner than it might be next dusk. Along the flow line, the light breaks into finer filaments, thin as tidal threads, over a flat. A faint secondary ray begins to form, then dissolves, and the mainstream resumes its old course. Every small change feels like surf, finding a new bar, and then smoothen again over deeper water. Somewhere beyond these fields, people stand in driveways and on balconies with mugs cooling in their hands and a map open on a phone, counting down nothing at all, just walking their eyes from a bright star to a dimmer one, and then along a line to the place where a smaller green hangs, content to be found by patient seekers who have come only to watch a slow tide turn and to let their thoughts loosen in the same direction as the long, quiet flow above, where the night's faint ship lays out a wake that won't reach the shore, but still teaches the shore to breathe slower for a while. There is a kindness to a scene that repeats with small variation, like the regular lift of a swell against a rock wall. On this postcard night, I make a second sketch and change almost nothing, only the shading of the lagoon and the tilt of the tail's edge. The page smells faintly of pencil and dry air. The sky keeps its low current, and the ship between stars holds to its heading with the same courtesy it has shown since we first noticed the trace. As the hour drifts, the anti-tail illusion pulses once, then eases, and the larger expected stream resumes its dominance, the way a main channel overrules a back eddy when the tide slackens. I let the instruments collect their steady numbers, but my eyes prefer the naked view tonight, a small discipline of watching, as if out on a quiet pier with the light from a far buoy marking the rhythm of the water. No hurry, no verdicts, only the slow assurance that comes when a traveller rounds a cape, and the currents tell the same story they told 1,000 nights before. I close the notebook and sit with the air for one more minute, letting the field recede until the visitor is just another low light, and the low light feels like it has always been there, and perhaps will be again on some other night when the tide and the course align. The margin holds our date, the shore holds our steps, and the sky keeps its gentle waterline as the seconds gather in the corner of the page. At 02:14, the room remembers how to breathe. Listen with me for a moment. Room air moves in a low thread that barely lifts the curtain edge. Electronics murmur like distant weather, and the sky outside is quiet enough to hear yourself settling. In that stillness, a comet's small change brightness has the same scale as a breath. People call such a rise an outburst. Here we will call it a stitch in the cloth. Temporary, ordinary, part of how the fabric holds together. An outburst is not an explosion. It is the surface loosening where sunlight has warmed seams just enough for trapped gas to slip through. A sealed pocket finds a gap. Vapor carries fine dust. And for a while, the glow looks thicker. Then the seam rests again. When spacecraft have watched up close, they've seen quick jets lace outward and fall back to calm, more like a picked-up thread than a tearing of the weave. The woven hush remains. Different ices unspool at different warmths. Water ice asks for more heat. Carbon-bearing ices, like carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, answer sooner, even when the surface is still cold by ordinary measures. That is why a traveller far from the sun can still show a thin veil, and why nearer in a small patch might quicken before the plane around it does. One fibre responds, then another, and the pattern appears thicker, though the cloth is the same cloth, only carrying more air between its threads for a time. The nucleus is not a smooth bolt of fabric. It is a piecework of harder and softer panels, seams that have seen seasons, layers of dust that insulate and layers that leak. As the body turns, one seam faces the light and gives. Later, that seam cools and tightens while its neighbour slackens. From far away we see this as a rise and fall in brightness, or as narrow jets that drift with the spin. But the underlying act is simple: sunshine easing a stitch, then letting it set again as the roll continues. The pattern is rotational, not erratic. Dust helps the eye read the loom's work. Gas glows, where sunlight sets certain molecules ringing, but dust reflects and diffuses light, like a curtain made of very fine fibre. When a vent sends out finer grains, the glow looks softer and broader, as though the cloth had been brushed. Larger grains act differently, falling behind and brightening more gently over longer stretches. Many nights of observing tell the same story: brief thickening from fine dust, a slower, calmer presence from coarser dust, both carried outward by the light that first lifted them. If a brightness rise catches us by surprise, patience is the correct reply. One seam loosens, the count goes up, and then it returns toward its earlier level as the pocket empties and the surface cools. Observers stack images and write down times, but underneath the numbers is a habit of care that treats each change as a normal stitch in the same garment rather than a rip. That way, when a second rise arrives hours or days later, it is not a shock, but a familiar piece returning to the loom. There are nights when the pattern runs a little quicker. A vent may face us more squarely. The rotation may bring two active seams into sunlight at once. The solar wind may shift and carry the lifted fibres into a region where they scatter more efficiently, so the whole panel looks brighter, even though nothing has broken or burned. And in those hours we let the exposure stretch, we keep the cadence steady, and we accept that the cloth will sometimes present a denser face before relaxing again into its regular weave, because the sky is large, the stitches many, and the garment has learned to breathe under all kinds of gentle pulls without ever coming apart. From time to time, we notice little tilts in the light curve, small asymmetries that repeat. They are the signature of the spinner's hand. The nucleus turns, jets align, then drift, and our viewpoint shifts the pattern as though the loom itself had been moved slightly to one side. Pair that with the grain size changing over a night, and the result is a modest, rounded peak in brightness, a soft shoulder down, and the sense that the woven hush has tightened or loosened by a finger width, nothing more. If we could hold a grain between finger and thumb, it would be smaller than a misted speck of flour, or broader than table salt, and either way, it would be a fibre in the larger cloth of the comae. The finer the grains, the more quickly they brighten and fade. The coarser, the longer they remain as suspended threads. Telescopes that sense long wavelengths read this mixture as a change in texture, while cameras that favour shorter light read it as a change in sheen. Both views describe the same fabric from opposite sides. So when you hear outburst, your body can stay loose. The word only marks a place where seams loosened and then settled. The visitor is still coherent, still turning, still answering sunlight in the ordinary way of porous ice and dust with small pockets of gas inside. What your eyes see as a thicker panel is a local weave, admitting more air for a brief time, and when that air moves on, the panel looks like itself again, with perhaps a new thread laid across its face for the next pass of light to find and follow. Let's rest now inside the woven hush. The fan line rides at the edge of hearing. A refrigerator thread hums, steady and fine. The building's quiet fabric carries a soft vibration that smooths even the sharpest corner of thought. Outside, the night lays its cloth over roofs and roads and fields until everything feels tailored to calm, and where the sky's garment lifts just slightly, you can imagine a few bright fibers drifting outward, then fading as they become part of the larger, restful weave. I begin with a single grain, close enough to imagine it as a mote of pale stone suspended in a drifting veil. Its shape is not a perfect sphere, more like a tiny irregular droplet that light can wrap around. When sunlight reaches it, some of the light goes straight through, and some turns and softens, and some goes back toward us, like a breath cooled by fog. The fluff of the comae is built of countless such motes, making a quiet weather of light. A grain that small answers, light by size as much as by substance. When the grain's span is near the light's wavelength, scattering grows directional. Some angles brighten, others dim, and the sum gives the mote a faint halo of its own. Bigger grains lean toward gentle forward scatter. Finer dust throws light more evenly, like mist under a street lamp when the air is still. Under a telescope, these differences blur into one soft field, but our understanding stays local, starting at the grain. I step out 1 arm's length. Around each grain the gas is thinner than thin, yet busy enough to change what we hear in the light when we spread it across a spectrum. Gas shows narrow notes, precise and crisp, like markers we can set a finger on. Dust contributes a smooth brightness without those notes, a background that fills the page. Images take both together and show us shape. Spectra unspool the gas lines and let us tell one species from the next. The veil holds both truths without strain. Another pace outward, and time begins to matter. Sunlight touches the surface, but the response is delayed by how quickly heat can work its way through a porous crust. At noon, on the nucleus, a vent may not wake until evening. At morning, a pocket may still be giving off last night's warmth. This lag makes small offsets between where we see the most glow and where the sun stands, and once we know to expect it, the offset becomes a comfort rather than a puzzle. The veil drifts, but it drifts by rule. Rotation adds its easy turn to the picture. Many small bodies spin within hours, not days, so active sites move in and out of sunlight on a schedule a person could count if they wished. As a seam wakes, gas rises, and the nearby dust brightens. As it turns away, the glow softens, and the field returns to a steadier tint. Light curves show this in quiet hills and valleys that repeat, not perfectly but faithfully enough to make the rhythm clear even to a sleepy eye. The veil turns with the stone within it. From that mid-view, I step wide again, until the coma becomes a weather system of mist around a dim core. Close to the nucleus, grains are finer, and the glow is smoother. Farther out, where larger grains persist, the brightness takes on a faint grain of its own, like fog near a meadow edge, where the air is taller and the grass cooler. Gas drifts the fastest and fades first, setting narrow signatures in the light along the way, while dust marks the flow with endurance, its slower scatter giving us the soft outline that our cameras love to catch. Everything keeps to the same suite of simple behaviors: heat, lift, cool, settle, and the pattern holds without complaint, even as the visitor rounds its turn and leans back toward cold. There is a kind thought to hold here. The veil's look from one night to the next is not a mood swing. It is a quiet sum of grain sizes born that day, the angle of the sun on the seams, the lag of heat through a crust, and the spin that brings everything back around on a time scale the instruments can follow. When a patch brightens quickly, we suspect finer grains have joined the air. When brightness lingers long after the gas lines have faded, we read coarser dust a little farther from the core, still scattering softly, because larger specks keep their light longer as they drift through the slow wind that carries them outward without hurry. And perhaps the calmest comfort of the whole scene is how these small mechanics repeat, until even a casual watcher starts to feel the rhythms before they see them. If I step closer again in my mind, the single grain returns and brings with it the physics that shaped our view. Light, bending by size and angle, explains the way a narrow sunward crescent near the core can look more radiant than the dust side, even though the total light is the same. Light spreading into color explains why the gas leaves tidy markers while the dust leaves none. Heat flowing by degrees explains why today's brightest point does not sit exactly under the sun. Spin, dust, gas. Each small idea whispers into the same drifting veil until the whole field looks inevitable. One more wide step, and we are back in the starry frame. The coma drapes itself thinly over the background, a pale weather that softens the pinpoints nearest the core and leaves the outer field untouched. There is no need to sharpen or chase. We let the brightness lie where it chooses, and we annotate what belongs to gas and what belongs to dust so that tomorrow's images can sing the same tune in a different key. The veil tells us what it needs. We keep the listening steady. I rest the pencil near the screen and breathe with the room. The fan hums, the graphs progress in small, neat lines. The counts rise and settle like a fog lifting from a hollow and returning as the air cools again. If your eyes prefer to close here, that is allowed. The veil will keep drifting, and the measurements will keep placing small commas on the page so we can pick up the thread whenever you return, and the numbers will be waiting where we left them. And if a body takes shape far from its star, then light reaches it as a thin ration, and the first layers freeze what the star cannot keep warm. If the early disk is quiet enough out there, beyond the neighborhood, where water turns to ice, then other ices can also settle and persist. Carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and simple organics locking into place the way a lantern's oil rests in. It's glass until a match arrives much later. If that distance holds through the body's youth, then memory accumulates as frost. If the body remains cold for long stretches, then its surface makes a habit of keeping secrets. Heat arrives gently and leaves gently, and deeper layers may never learn that their star has seasons. In young systems, observers map a snowline, a radius where particular gases freeze, using millimeter light and infrared signatures. The maps show rings of chemistry that circle a star like faint halos of permission where certain ices are allowed to endure. If our traveller was born in such a ring, then it likely kept some of that permission for the road ahead. If it's pushed outward early, by a nudge from a forming giant or by the slow shuffle of orbits, then the lantern of chemistry goes dim and stays dim for a very long time. Cold preserves structure and vacuum preserves calm. The grains on the surface grow darker under space weathering, as solar and cosmic rays bake thin crusts into something closer to charcoal, and beneath that smoked glass, deeper ices rest with their patterns intact. If we see a surface that reflects little light, then that soot may be the lampshade the cold has built. If we measure certain ratios in gas set free, slight differences in how a molecule weighs depending on which flavor of an element it carries, then we can compare those numbers with catalogues from comets closer to home. Carbon has its ways of keeping score. Oxygen and nitrogen do too. Some comets in our system lean one way, some lean another, and the mix hints at the environments where they formed. If a future spectrum of this traveller were to offer such ratios with clarity, then we would have a passport stamp to file, not a destination to insist on, only a better sense of the road that led it here. If organics ride with ice, then laboratory work suggests they can last. Ultraviolet light can shuffle small molecules into larger ones that sit tight in the matrix, and those larger products can persist when kept at cryogenic temperatures. Aromatic rings and simple alcohols are good at hiding from decay when ice keeps the world still. Experiments and sample returns have found carbon-rich residues that withstand harsh treatment, and telescopes have seen related signatures in the cold of space. If the chemistry is stocked with such lantern fuel, then a brief warming can coax a small, readable glow without consuming the store. If a vent opens, then the lightness of gas tells us about warmth at that depth, and the company it keeps tells us what once froze there. If we see mostly signatures that prefer cooler conditions, then the surface has not been seasoned by many close passes to a star. If, instead, we see lines that favor water coming late to the party, then perhaps the lantern has been relit more often. The green around our visitor remains a sign of fragments made fresh, not a verdict about what lies beneath. But if it returns on nights when other colors stay modest, then layers rich in certain carbon paths may be taking their turn near the surface. What better kind of memory could a traveler carry than chemistry kept cold? If the body spent eons between stars, then its outside film has likely hardened into a dull, protective skin that slows heat, shifts color, and keeps the inner lantern dim until a real spark arrives. If that spark is sunlight gathered near a perihelion, then we may only peel back millimeters of time, and that will be enough, because a little gas, a little dust, and a trace of color can speak for a much thicker archive we do not need to expose all at once. If we are gentle with these inferences, then we avoid pretending to read the whole book by a single line. If it was expelled early from its natal system, while disks were still crowded and young, or late during a slower rearrangement, then the difference matters to the record. The earlier route would seal more primitive ices. The later might carry more processed layers. Either way, a dim lantern traveled and kept traveling, because the interstellar night is kind to things that prefer quiet, and because the only forces that really disturb that calm are rare. If you imagine the glow we see tonight as the thinnest film of warmth over a library of colder pages, then you are seeing these data as astronomers prefer to see them, as a permission slip to imagine carefully rather than an invitation to declare. The pages will keep. If we take all the ifs and place them in a ring of patient light, then a picture settles without hard edges. Far birth, cold custody, darkened skin, preserved stock, a brief warming, a readable breath. And if we return to it tomorrow, then the picture will sit in the same place, letting us add a mark or two without erasing the rest, because a body that remembers by being cold does not rush to change its story, and a reader who remembers by being kind to uncertainty does not rush to finish it. And between the two, the dim lantern stays lit just enough to guide our next small step. That is enough for tonight. The room keeps a low hum, and I offer 3 steady tones to hold while the night takes its slow breath. First, the path, a transient curve that does not close, a line that will not circle back. Second, the behavior, faint activity driven by ice's answering sunlight, loudest near warmth, quieter in the cold. Third, the color notes, specific bands in the spectrum that let us name which fragments are singing. With these handrails under the sound of the fans, we can move without haste. On the path, gravity writes the meter. Most neighbors near us move in bound rhythms, ellipses that repeat. A visitor on a hyperbolic track carries more pace than the sun can keep, so the measure runs once and fades. Astronomers check the curve with careful ephemerides and let the numbers settle until the uncertainty shrinks. No symbols, no drumroll, just a quiet confirmation that a one-time passage is underway, and that we are listening during the brief bars available to us before the line grows too faint for human ears. This does not mean sudden exits or perilous swoops. The pace is smooth, set by geometry and distance, and the dates are only waypoints for planning, not cliff edges. Instruments keep time, observers compare nights, and the result is a reliable cadence. Approach with a slow rise in brightness, nearest pass with modest flourish, recession with a soft decrescendo. If you think of that arc as a single phrase in a longer piece, you have the sense of it, measured and calm. On behavior, the second handrail reminds us that ice speaks in temperature. As the sun's energy increases, ices close to the surface, relax into gas, carrying tiny grains outward. As energy falls, the release slows and the field thins. Rotation adds cross rhythm. Active spots move in and out of light, so small changes in brightness arrive in patterns that repeat loosely, like a motif returning in a larger work. None of this is alarm. It is the ordinary music of a porous turning body, warmed by a star and then allowed to cool again. Outbursts, when they appear, are accents rather than crashes. A sealed pocket opens, the line lifts, and then it settles back toward the baseline as the pocket empties and the surface firms. Some nights the accent lands a little stronger because the angle favors us, or because finer grains scatter light more efficiently. But the structure of the piece does not change. We record the time, we lengthen the exposure if the whisper is too faint, and we keep counting in the same even bar, so the story remains readable without strain. On color notes, the third handrail gives us pitch. Split the light, and you find familiar lines where small carbon fragments glow after sunlight nudges them. Nearby sit the signatures of related species, each keeping to its narrow seat on the staff. Cameras collect the whole chord as images. Spectrographs separate the tones so we can tell which voices are stronger on a given night. Filters tuned to those bands let us compare one session to the next and track small shifts without needing the scene to grow bright to the eye. Cross-checks keep the orchestra together. Ground telescopes and space observatories hear different parts of the range. When they agree, confidence rises, and when they differ, we look for reasons in geometry, weather, or instrument response, rather than in extravagant explanations. The practice is simple and musical. Tune, listen, compare, adjust, until the line you trust sits a little higher than the noise and keeps its place across several nights. Then a trend is real enough to be held lightly while we continue to listen. These 3 tones do not tell us everything. They tell us what not to overplay. A hyperbolic path does not reveal a birthplace by itself. A rise in brightness does not demand drama. A strong band in the spectrum points to fragments, not to a single parent in the dark. We gather what the data can carry and leave the rest alone for now, because a quiet score remains quiet, even when we long for a finale, and patience is part of the method as much as optics are. I like how the night steadies when the handrails are in place, because then the mind can drift without falling, and the story can stretch and soften, and you can feel the difference between a claim and a measure. The first trying to be the whole piece, and the second being only a bar that repeats until meaning grows from repetition. As the low hum settles under the breathing, and the instruments keep watch with their small green indicators, and the ticking of files saved one by one into the archive, where tomorrow's listening will begin again. Monitors dim, the fan finds a deeper register, the graphs glow less brightly while the line keeps its place above the floor, and the room leans into the note that holds at the edge of hearing until it thins like air at dawn and slips back into the hum. Tonight I choose one path to follow. A narrow road painted in green runs through the field of measurements, and we walk it at an easy pace from one instrument to the next. I keep my hand on that hue so it doesn't slip behind the brighter traffic of white light and dust, and we call this little journey the Green Mile. Every road needs milestones. In photometry, they are passbands, carefully shaped windows that let through a chosen slice of colour while gently refusing the rest. Some windows are broad, like town gates you can pass without slowing. Others are narrow, like checkpoints that ask who you are before you go on. The green road often winds through a band where carbon fragments shine, while a nearby red or blue gate serves as a control stretch of pavement that tells us how dust alone looks when gas is quiet. Different observatories live in different towns along the route. A ground telescope listens from the valley floor, a space telescope from the ridge road above weather and air. Their milestones are placed at slightly different distances, so we carry a pocket map that translates one town's mile markers to another's, using standard stars as our surveyors. When the maps agree, we walk forward. When they diverge by a step or two, we pause and check the signs, rather than invent a detour that isn't there. Once the map is steady, we trace the colour as it rises and falls along the visitor's path around the sun. The index between a green lane and a red lane is one kind of compass. The ratio between a narrow gas lane and a broader dust lane is another. Night by night, those numbers lay down modest waypoints, the hue leaning greener when gas sings near the nucleus, leaning browner when dust takes the lead. There is no race on this road, only a calm record of where the mile markers sit. A quiet advantage of narrow gates is that they take us closer to the real route of the gas itself. Where a wide road blends travellers together, a tight checkpoint picks out those freshly made fragments that glow only for a limited stretch, like a convoy that appears just after a bend and dissolves a few miles later. The broader lanes keep us honest about dust, which is the reliable freight that fills the highway most nights, moving steadily outward and holding light without giving us the same sharp waypoints that gas provides. Geometry changes the road's feel underfoot. When the sun sits at a different angle to our view, forward scattering by dust brightens the sunward lane like a slope that makes walking easier. And the colour can tilt because the surface we're crossing has changed grade, not because the road itself has changed name. On other nights, when the angle relaxes, the walk feels level again, and our green waypoints settle back into their usual spacing. We mark the hills and flats and keep going. Ground and space walks share the same destination, but the routes differ. The valley road has weather, the ridge road does not. The valley road feels the low air, which can warm and cool and bend light by small amounts. The ridge road keeps to cleaner distances and steadier signs. So we cross-check the mileage, use translation tables, and put our small trust in trends that hold across both routes, because a path that repeats under different boots is a path worth keeping. Soon, the colour story thickens into a travel log we can reread. A set of green to red waypoints tighten before closest approach, reflecting more gas on the inner lanes. A week later, the spacing loosens as the convoy thins. A calm night shows the dust lane ruling the highway, while gas signs flicker nearer the centre line. And from those scenes, we draw no banners, only the simple, restful conclusion that this visitor's journey writes itself in small, legible steps that a careful walker can trace without hurry, without cutting corners, and without mistaking a painted arrow for the final town at the end of the road. I keep the tone even, because colour can tempt confident leaps. A greener turn does not crown a single parent ice. A reddening does not dismiss gas, and 2 miles that look alike may have different reasons under their gravel. The right practice is gentler. Measure, translate, compare, and add a waypoint to the map only when both the valley road and the ridge road point to the same bend. That way, the trail you build can be followed later by anyone who cares to walk it. Somewhere in this quiet walk, a small joy arrives, the recognition of a pattern repeating, not rigidly, just well enough to greet you as a familiar crossroads, when the visitor loops past warmth and back toward cold, and the green mile tapers to a thin stripe you can still trace with a fingertip on the chart while your breathing slows and the room settles, and the road you've drawn continues off the page toward the outskirts where the signs thin and the traffic fades, leaving only a calm line that leads to a threshold we can see, but do not need to cross tonight. At the threshold of the dark field, I rest my hand on the frame. Step with me along the outbound wake. The room carries a space hush, like calm water before dawn, and the visitor has already rounded its headland and set a steady course toward colder seas. We keep to an easy pace beside it, matching the slow drift as distance widens and the tide of sunlight falls. The farther from the sun we sail, the gentler the energy that reaches the hull. Flux thins with distance the way swells flatten offshore, and the deck of the nucleus answers in kind. Vents that sang near closest approach grow quiet. Seams that breathed freely now tighten, and the faint atmosphere round the body narrows like a bay at ebb. Nothing breaks. The sea simply smooths. The comae trims its edge as a prudent captain reefs canvas. Near the core the greenish water clears. Farther out, the the broad sheet of dust disperses into the open, its grains set adrift by the same light that once raised them. A tail that seemed sure of its channel becomes a looser current, its length less certain, its banks harder to trace, and then it too thins into its background as the ship holds for deeper water. Currents of gravity curl beneath the keel. Planets nudge like distant tides, small surges that bend the track a degree here or there without pulling the vessel into any harbour. A one-way chart remains a one-way chart. The line does not close on itself, and after our brief shared reach across the inner sea, the visitor returns to lanes that will take it outward beyond familiar markers. The course is firm, the turns are gentle. Logs written in light grow quieter. Where the nightly curve once rose and fell with the passage of active inlets under sunlight, now the hills soften, the valleys fill, and the whole trace settles toward a nearly level swell. Outgassing torques ease as the wind dies, so the spin steadies, or drifts only by small amounts that a careful helmsman would note with the tip of a pencil and then leave to tomorrow's page. The voyage gains its long, even strides again. Instruments adapt like crew changing watch at dusk. Exposures stretch to catch the dimmest spray. Stacks of images replace a single long stare. Filters are chosen as if picking reliable stars for navigation, favouring bands that still carry a readable swell over those now smooth as glass. And in that patient seamanship, the record keeps its bearings, even as the wake behind the traveller breaks into ripples too small to name. Because the measure of care is not the size of the wave, but the steadiness of the hand that writes it down. When the sea goes flat and the sky clears to its widest blue-grey without asking for any hurry at all, from the pier of earth, geometry keeps arranging small tricks. On nights when the viewing angle favours forward scatter, the sunward side glows like a brightened shoal, and the colour shifts as if a sandbar lay just beneath the surface. Later, when the angle changes, the shoal vanishes, and the water looks level again. The antitail that flared near the turn relaxes into an ordinary stream, a back eddy released at slack tide. You can imagine the dust as flotillas peeling away from the main channel. Fine grains drift apart quickly and fade like foam. Heavier craft keep their course longer and hold light modestly, marking the route long after gas has slipped beneath the surface again. Telescopes sensitive to different lengths of light chart these flotillas with different inks, yet the story is the same map. The convoy thins with distance, the boats grow fewer, and the track is easier to read than to see. All the while, the larger sea remains calm. Solar wind brushes past like a steady offshore breeze. Plasma fields and radiation push on the faintest spray, but with less effect now that the spray has become mist and the mist is settling back into clear water. If there is any new music in the hull, it is too slight for deckhands to hear. The ship sails by habit, not by effort, and the long swell ahead promises a quiet passage. Shorefolk still come to the rail. They point out the path along a line of stars, then let their eyes soften when the mark refuses to leap out of the chart as it once did. Some bring binoculars, some bring only memory, and both are enough to feel the ship receding. Its wake a light stroke on glass that spreads, thins, and disappears without complaint, leaving the harbour no poorer for the visit, and the water a little slower for a minute, as if it had been listening too. Our part in this is simple seamanship. We keep notes, We trim expectations as the breeze falls. We do not chase surf where a tide is more honest. And when the last leg of brightness drops below our practical horizon, we mark the time, fold the chart, and set it where we can find it for the next voyage that crosses our bay. You can let your shoulders settle here. The ship is past the breakwater, and the water knows how to carry it without us for a while. I'm writing to you as the room settles, letter quiet, to say what we can hold without tightening our hands. This is not a verdict. It is a soft inventory. I keep a thread of calm along the margin so the words don't pull, and I lay each line like a stitch that can be lifted later, if better. Cloth arrives. The sky has been generous and unhurried. We can match its pace. Here are 3 quiet pillars we may trust. First, the path. A visitor that travels on an open curve passes through rather than around, and the math that names such a path is patient and repeatable. Second, the behavior. Faint breath from ices warmed by sunlight was ordinary for small bodies, near a star, and the warming eases as distance grows, like a seam that loosens and then rests. Third, the colour notes. When light is split, narrow lines from familiar fragments appear where many comets have sung before, and those lines help us describe the weave without guessing its every thread. None of these pillars requires strain to hold. Between those pillars is the bridge we call plausible. We move from measurements to meanings with careful steps. Repeat the exposure. Confirm the feature on a second instrument. Compare tonight's ratios with last week's, and look for the same shape in another observatory's cloth. A claim earns weight when it returns to the same stitch in different hands, and the fabric lies flatter each time we smooth it. In this work, certainty is not a shout. It is the place where the thread no longer snags when you pass your palm across it. We stop there, breathe, and continue only if the weave invites it. Public excitement has its own weather, and sometimes the wind tries to turn a neat seam into a banner. Words like explosion or mysterious reversal catch at the edge of the fabric. Our craft prefers gentler language. Outburst for a temporary brightening, vent for a small opening, rotation for a rhythm that repeats. If green grows for a night, it is because fragments are being made near the surface, and light is catching them on their brief walk outward, not because the cloth has changed into something it is not. I am content to let the garment be a garment, and to mend only when the tear is real. What steadies me most is the way many hands stitch one cloth. A telescope above the air prizes apart the light, and finds narrow seams where carbon fragments sing. A telescope on the ground hears the broader sheen of dust, and watches the brightness rise and settle with the turn of the body. A timing network marks the motion against the stars so the path can be traced. And in quiet offices day and night, people compare notes, correct small color terms, remeasure standard stars, and place their files in public cupboards where anyone can run a finger along the selvage and feel that the edge is true. 1,000 small courtesies that lengthen the fabric without fray, and let those who come later begin their work already standing on finished heem. So I would like you to keep a small practice as you listen. When a number appears in your mind, an angle, a distance, a rotation, imagine it as one stitch in a long seam. Stitches hold not because they are loud, but because they are many and even. Our visitor will go on its way, whether we hurry it or not. What matters is that we place each stitch where it belongs and resist the itch to embroider a picture we have not yet measured. Quiet measures make strong cloth. Sleep asks for kindness to uncertainty. There are pages we cannot yet open, layers still cold, ratios that need clearer nights, colours that will settle with more time at the loom. We can leave those pages unsewn without losing the book. The work will be here tomorrow. The instruments will resume their soft counting, and the map of small truths will extend by a finger width as we add another row of even stitches and check that the pattern still lies flat across the table where the night leaves it for us. No drama is needed to keep the thread from tangling. Care is enough. I'll fold this letter with a final thread for you to keep. Hold to the 3 pillars, an open path that passes through, a quiet physics that breathes with sunlight and distance, and colour lines that name fragments without overreaching. Then let the rest drift past until the fabric itself suggests a new seam to sew. The thread of calm stays where you left it, ready to be picked up when your eyes open again. The same gentle colour, the same light tension, the same even run that returns, softer than before. The night shift breathes in a narrow room where screens glow like panes seen through a silver fog. Fans keep a thin current moving, and I sit with the instruments that do not mind the hour. Out at the L2 outpost, the observatory keeps its balance in the quiet, staring past the earth the way a patient watcher looks over a field at dawn. Here on the ground, I review the stream and the calibrations, each file arriving like a soft wisp that curls once and settles. The log for tonight is simple. A set of integrations at longer wavelengths where cold fragments answer. A companion set in the near bands where finer detail lives, and a run of images from telescopes under our weather to catch the wider halo. I check the headers, note the temperatures, glance at the guide star traces. Nothing strays. The silver fog of data hangs evenly across the hours, thin enough to read through, thick enough to mute distraction. When a spectrum lands, it unfurls like breath against glass. Lines rise where they should, narrow and tidy, and the baseline has the smooth, faint grain of dust. I compare to last week's template, and the changes are gentle. No sudden peaks, the greenwood bands proportionate, the long tail of the continuum easing as distance does its measured work. I annotate once, twice, then let the marks rest. The fog prefers light handwriting. Across the hall, a small server stack purrs behind a door with a dim badge reader. Each finished observation becomes a parcel in a public cupboard, labelled and dated so any careful hand could take it down later and see the same threads we're seeing now. The archive grows by inches, not by leaps. New files mist in, older ones settle, and the whole shelf smells faintly of clean metal and long patience. That is the kind of weather a good night leaves behind. I keep an eye on the queue from the valley sites. Their images arrive with the world still on them. Airfolds, a hint of moon, the slightest softening at the edge of a bright star, and they are lovely for those very reasons. Where space gives us the most transparent window, ground gives us the habit of watching, and together they knit a clearer fog than either alone. I align the frames, trim the margins, and the halo resolves in place, thin as breath, sure as breath. There is always a moment around the middle of night when the room seems to lean nearer. The numbers pause, the clock finds the quiet between ticks, and I let the pen stop moving. The visitor's colour has steadied, the broad scatter of dust has thinned, the gas lines sit where we expect, with only a little sway from rotation and view. Nothing in the fog is hiding a shape we've not met before. It is a good thing to report that nothing is crowding the glass tonight. Preparation pages sit under my elbow for the next travellers. Survey upgrades, earlier notices, quicker cross-checks. A note about wide cameras catching a faint streak a little sooner. A note about how we'll nudge the spectrograph to the right part of the band when another silver cloud appears, where last week's ephemeris draws an empty square. There's no rush in these plans. They read like a weather guide for a slow season. If the next visitor drifts in, we'll meet it with the same patience. I step nearer the screen and zoom, not to sharpen, but to feel the texture. Close to the core, the fog is finer, smooth as a single exhale on cold glass. Farther out, the grain grows, as if the moisture had begun to bead and slip into the night. The transition tells the same story the books tell. Fresh fragments near the source, endurance in the broader scatter, and I find the long sentence I've been saving and write it down. That the whole field keeps its soft coherence, even as the traveller glides outward into lower light, and even as each instrument hands the next instrument a dimmer parcel, because the system we use to read a faint, fog-soft signal is designed to let reality remain gentle on the page and in the mind, refusing to press it into a harder outline than the sky is offering. I file the night set and watch the progress bar drift from one shade to another, like morning beginning far away. An old habit has me open the archive index and search the new entries just to see them appear, each line a thin cloud that now belongs to everyone who knows how to read such weather. There is comfort in public shelves. They keep us honest, and they keep the work from vanishing when our own rooms go dark. Before I shut the lid, I look once more at the whole field. The halo sits on faint stars, like a veil you could almost miss if you blinked. Our notes hold steady. A visitor passing through, a body answering sunlight with ordinary breath, a colour that means fragments are being made and then allowed to fade. The silver fog of it all seems to thin as I watch. Whether from distance or from the room's light easing lower, I cannot say, and the distinction does not matter to the night. I save, I back up, I stand, and I let the cool corridor air clear my head the way a window clears when you stop breathing on it. The instruments will keep their watch, and I set the dial to night. We've kept to the measured things, a one-time path that passes through, a faint breath from ices, as sunlight visits and recedes, a small set of colour lines that name fragments as they glow and fade. Instruments near and far listened on different bands and returned to the same quiet places, and the maps they made agreed gently, more often than not. A green trace near the core marked fresh chemistry. Dust held the broader shine. Rotation and warmth composed the rise and fall without hurry. Across the nights, the halo thickened and thinned in ordinary ways. Near the sun, outgassing grew. Outbound, the field eased. Where geometry favoured forward scatter, the sunward edge brightened. Later, it softened again. Archives gathered the files, and the work became a shared weather anyone could read with patience. No single number tried to be a verdict. Each was one stitch in a calm seam. If your eyes are closing now, let them. The visitor continues along its open curve, and the sky is content to keep its quiet. We have a good picture to hold. Passing light, modest activity, colour as a guide, steady coordination among watchers. That is plenty for one night. Thank you for keeping company while the room and the instruments did their soft work. May your breathing match some easy rhythm in the dark. May the small truths we gathered rest where you can find them again, untroubled and clear. Sleep well, and let the quiet keep you until morning.